Hello everyone, welcome back. So this is the render and it took 1 minute and 14 seconds. And I did another one with global illumination turned on, and what I've done is I set these both to brute force, and that's what I prefer to use. And I set the number of bounces to 1 and raise to 256, and this is the result. So this is with global illumination 1 bounce, and this is without it. You can see there's a lift overall here and bounce of green, and then here it's much more there's a lot more illumination happening as well as this area. And the final render I did had global illumination on, but it's really up to you guys. You can see the ocean doesn't is not affected by that because it doesn't have any diffuse or any global illumination related shading features. So it's mainly about these rocks, which we can render separately and turn on global illumination only for those if we wanted to save render time. So what's next? Now I want to start doing the fog pass, and fog and redshift is actually really nice. And let's go to and the way it works is by changing some of the render settings. And let's go, I'm going to copy this, call this Atmo, and I'm going to turn off global illumination. I don't need that. For the AVs, it's fine, let's leave that. I'm going to lower these settings to 1020 by 720, and for the render settings I'm going to use 32 by 64 and lower this to 1. And for the Atmo, I don't need any geometry. Now we can render the atmosphere in here. If we go it's basically located under the volume, under the redshift volume scattering, and this is not to confuse with rendering VDB volumes or anything like that. It's mainly for the environment atmospheres. And we have this tint to control the color of the atmosphere, the scattering, which controls how much the light scatters in the environment, and then the attenuation, which is how far it travels back into the camera. So basically the decay of how strong the decay is, and then phase, which controls either forward scattering or backward scattering. And if we move this to the right side, we're going to get more forward scattering. If we move it to the other side, we get more backward scattering. This is if we want to control the fog via height. We don't want this. We want the fog to affect the entire environment. So I'm not going to change anything here. I'm going to leave everything as the same. And actually, I don't want to do it here. So let's change it in the Atmo, and then I'll show what we need to do. So here I'm going to set this to on. I'm going to select this in the render and hit render. So I went to enter Houdini and ticked on Atmo, and that's the ROP that's going to be used. And let's turn off any render controls. So it's not visible, and the main reason for that is because redshift by default ignores, or redshift lights by default, they ignore a volume interaction. This is something that is done to make sure that users are aware of which light contributes to the volume, because it can have really expensive render times. You have a huge city and you're including everything, it will take a lot of time for it to process, so they made it selective. And what we need to do is we need to change the contribution scale to 1, and same for the light here. I'm going to change the volume contribution to 1, and on the left side it's already rendering and it's full white. So let's wait. Okay, so it's rendering. Let's turn on this and let's gain it down, and you can see there is information there. Let's try -10, and we're getting information, but it's just the scattering is not working pretty well. The settings are not ideal for this. So let's set it to 0, and let's go to the out render settings, and let's lower the scattering to 0.01. And now it's much better. See, went from this to this. So I'm going to keep lowering this, and I'm going to use 0.002. And now we have scattering only affecting this area. Now Redshift has a really nice fog rendering, and what's happening right now is that the fog is included in the reflection and in the environment scale and in the camera, in the environment, camera, and reflection. And we don't want it to affect reflection. I still want the reflection to be 100% the same as before, and I don't want it to affect the environment scale. But I still don't like these options too much, because let's set this to 0. Yeah, we should see this is very close to, or 100% the same as before. But I don't like this because I like to render the fog separately and isolate it from any render I have, so that I don't have to redo. If I have a 15 hours frame, I don't want to re-render it because of the fog. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set everything to matte, the ocean, the cliffs, and the ships, and then we're going to focus on tweaking the fog based on that. So it doesn't matter what these settings are, we're going to be able to get the result that we want. So let's cancel this. If we go under the force objects, I'm going to change them from force objects to force matte, and let's hit render. And now we should see everything being used as matte, and then only the fog rendering. And that's how we're going to render this pass. Now, apparently there is a bug in Redshift. Now it's working. I think it's working. So let's check again. Last time I did this, it didn't work. Yeah, it's not working. You see, it's the environment is rendering, so it's not being used as matte, and that's an issue. So what I've done is I created a take. So let's go, the solution to fix this, I'm going to create a take, and let's go to the take list. I'm going to call this Atmo. And while in this pass, I'm going to go inside each one of these nodes and make sure it's set to matte. So all these ocean nodes, I'm going to go to the matte option, right click, include in selected take, and turn on matte. So now I have these 4. And then we have these 3. I'm not so sure which one. So this, yeah, not the instance. These 2. I'm going to go to the Redshift, matte, right click, enable matte. And then here with the proxy, we have to make sure that we enable override visibility and matte. So right click and take this on. What else do I have? I have ship. So right click, Redshift option, go under matte, right click, include take, and that's pretty much it. So let's go to the out context, let's switch back to the main, and here in the render take, I'm going to set this to Atmo, and now I can have these object force objects. And if we hit preview or interactive rendering now, we should get we should get everything working, and it is. So the only thing is the background is visible, you can see it here, but the ship and everything is included and used as a matte. So let's go to the last thing. I'm not gonna render this anyway, so I'm gonna disable background rendering, and that should fix this issue. So let's refresh. Okay, so that's our atmosphere. And let's go to the out context under the redshift volumetrics, and now with attenuation is set to 0, we're not going to get some nice decay, so we need to increase this. Set this to 0.1, and now we're getting this decay. You see, we're still seeing, and the light is decaying. It's not, previously it was 100% being sent back to the camera, so we're getting a lot of bounce. And I'm going to lower this to 0.01, and I'm going to tint the environment and give it a blue tint. I'm going to desaturate this. I'm also using this color to gain down the environment. And I prefer, now that we're doing these color tweaks, I prefer to do it while using the color IO, OCIO. Set this to 0, and maybe explore a few things from here. So let's desaturate this color even more. Something like that. Let's try 0.02. Cool, you can see how dense the environment gets with this. So let's try 0.04. Sorry, 0.04. And see, now the light decays quickly. It doesn't have a very strong attenuation. Previously it was just, it doesn't have any restriction. It goes through anything, and here it's making it look like there is a material interacting with the environment. So that's our environment. That's our fog pass, and I'm gonna change the phase, which adds the last touch on this. So what's gonna happen now is basically it's gonna change it to forward scatter, which means reflect more of the environment light, or whatever light you have surrounding, more towards the camera, so you get nicer glows and more focused glows like this. So if we look at the sky and set this to 0, you can see we're getting this uniform flat color. And if I set this to 0.8, for example, you see how nice the glow becomes. And with the center as well, we're getting the same thing. So this light is probably too intense, so I'm going to lower it. Let's go to the center here, which we could still do in the render, but I'm going to reduce it by 50% and maybe desaturate this a bit. And that's our fog. Now you can see we have a lot of noise here, and I'm going to show something. So for the render settings, I don't recommend you guys to do this, but what we can do is we can increase this to whatever values we need and lower this to 0.01, for example. And what this does is it will use a very low threshold that will make Redshift shoot 256 rays no matter what. And what Redshift is trying to do is really optimize the rays and how it traces things. And there is a dangerous option that we could use. I'll set this back to 0.5, which is this. And this basically turns off any important sampling Redshift has. And it's going to be a lot slower, but it can force to shoot rays uniformly whether we need them or not. And I found this to be very, very helpful with complex lighting scenarios. Like, for example, you want to emit from a fog, or you want to emit illumination from a volume and illuminate a very complex environment, or these kind of effects. So let's template this and let's hit render. And again, these values are very high now. and you can see it's much cleaner than the interactive, obviously, but I'm gonna turn this off and show the difference. So let's cancel this. I think it's enough. Let's template this. Let's disable don't automatically reduce samples. I do think that the rocks are still visible, and I think they are visible. Yeah, they're being shaded here. So let's go to the volume, and I think the proxy feature is not being propagated to all of them. If I go under Atmo, it's there. Okay, I'll double check this, and then I'll verify it in the next video. So back to the render, it's done, and this is without that option. Same render settings, same everything. So here inside the redshift settings, this is without the don't automatically reduce samples, and this is with. But you can see the render time difference. It's going to be a lot slower, but it will take you a lot longer to clean the noise by tweaking the render settings. And let's increase it even higher. So let's try 128, 256, and this is 0.3. Don't reduce samples. And again, trust me, this is a very complex pass to render, especially getting that glow from the environment light, and it's a very high-res environment. Now what we could do to help Redshift is go and blur the HDR map, maybe reduce it, or obviously reduce it in size as well, and that should help with the amount of noise we're getting. So this is before, and this is after the increase of settings. And you can see now we're getting really nice sampling from the fog. And let's take a look at the sky pass. Yeah, we're shading the rocks for sure. And this is from the center, and this is really clean now. The decay is very cool. Let's reduce this. Yeah, it's very cool. So all we have to do is fix the rendering of the rocks. So we could play with the white balance as well to explore different options for the environment or tones. Something like this. And let's add some vignette. Add saturation. And this is a very